Yes, the ethno-tourism is another research project that I've worked on, which grew out of the art project, because, and the kind of identity politics project, because a lot of the art, the consumers of the art, are actually tourists. So in Kuru, the development, the NGO, have at Dekar village, they have a shop where they sell art. They have a gallery where they display the art. The art is even displayed by the artists themselves sometimes in front of their house. So it's very public. So people come in there, collectors, to either tourists who go by, happen to, because Dekar village is on the main road from, that goes all the way from Grobabis in Namibia to Maun in Botswana, and it's the main road, and Dekar village is off that road. So people sometimes on their way to Maun, which is a favorite tourist place, stop over there for a coffee. They have a coffee shop there, and then they browse around and they buy stuff: T-shirts, postcards, greeting cards, calendars, something like this one, which are on sale, which feature some of the art. Then like here, and so on. Yeah. So tourists are some of the consumers of the art, along with the other type of consumer, the collectors, of whom there is a growing, now a large number all over the world. And some of them, I think I may have mentioned this already, maybe off camera, actually fly into the community, into Dekar village in their jibby, as the Bushmen call them, the helicopters, and buy right there on site. So I was interested in the tourists as well as the collectors, because the tourists too, like the collectors, follow this primitivism trope. Tourism, I mean, that's of course, ethno-tourism especially caters to that, right? Ethno-tourism, we have it in Canada too, these native villages, people in native costume being the guides, and in native dress, as I said earlier, undress is particularly popular here. So people take pictures and they buy crafts, and they also buy art, either as prints, unframed prints, or art as it's reproduced in calendars or cards or whatever. So I was interested in the tourism, the tourist, because the tourist is, tourism has, the Bushmen have become quite a popular tourism attraction. People come and visit them in Namibia, in Botswana. There are even tourism enterprises, such as Into Africa, where I did field work. I did a field work project on tourism, which took me, among other places, to Into Africa, which is that was fun field work, mind you. Very different from the mud hut, the cow dung hut, because I had an air-conditioned room, swimming pool, well-stocked bar, sundowner, and of course, in the right smack in the middle, not in the middle, you had to go by Land Rover over dunes to the Bushman village, where people went, were taken in the evening. The trip interrupted with just mentioned sundowner, where the Land Rover would stop and some people would, the staff would get out and set up a table and pour champagne. Anyway, that was field work, unusual field work. But anyway, and then we went to the native village where the primitivism trope was played to the fullest. Before we even came, it took about 20 minutes because the tour into Africa is on a huge site, a huge piece of land, which had been one time a farm, which the tourism enterprise bought to set up this lodge, this resort. And when we set out to visit on our 20-minute trip, a shortwave radio message was sent to the Bushmen in the village that the tourists are coming, and they changed into their loincloths from jeans and T-shirts. I mean, we see this everywhere in the world, right? I mean, that's Larson has classic cartoons of. Remember Larson? Do you have Larson cartoons on your office door? Use them for teaching? Yeah, I do. Yeah, I did. Anyway, so I was interested in, in this whole tourism, this tourism enterprise, to see which some NGOs, and as I said, at that time I was involved with NGOs, sometimes even hands-on a little bit, consultant and so on, and they wanted to set up at Kuro a tourism operation too, and they wondered if it was a good thing. And so I did this project where I visited these tourism sites and decided this kind of tourism is not a good thing. It caters to stereotypes that anthropologists have tried their utmost to deconstruct, and that are harmful to the people, the Bushmen. They really impede their effort to become, in a realistic way, members of the society as it is today, of the polity. Anyway, but there is another type of tourism operation, which I also did some field work on, which was far less sumptuous than the Into Africa experience. The backpacker. This one I just described, the Into Africa, was for the international tourist, well-heeled, lots of money. The other is the backpacker type of tourist, who is much more venturesome, has far less money, but is more interested in seeing the real Bushmen. And here are some real Bushmen, not the ones that take off their jeans, but that keep on the dress they have, and then they take people through their community. These are all taken at Dakar, where community. This is a man named Kumaka, who was a good friend of mine. In fact, he and his wife, Ngaba, adopted Patricia and me and gave us Bushman names. My name was Kanknai and hers Dikrau. And this sort of scene, children in front of their hut, the ubiquitous donkey cart that some Bushmen have, with which they cart stuff, and some of them do it even for an income. They run little carting businesses, transport businesses, renting out the carts. In fact, I once on one of my field trips worked on a donkey cart for transportation. Women around their cooking pots in front of their hut, cooking the meal. This is the sort of site that the backpacker tourist will be presented with. A woman who came back from her gathering trip, who collected a big kaba. Kaba is that water root. Kaba, it's called. And here are some San women who are making beadwork, which they do sell in a little shop at Kourou along with the art to tourists, and so on. Scenes like that, and people show them their goats, their gardens, and that kind of backpacking tourism on a small scale is something that in my article, which I was asked to do and report on, I thought was a good thing, and they have since adopted a scheme like that at Dakar, and in fact other Bushman communities have as well. Now it doesn't generate nearly the income that the Into Africa does, with the pools and the sundowners and the bar and the primitivism display, of loincloth and the bushwalks where they do phony hunts too. We were taken one time. We had to get up at 6 a.m. to go on a hunt with a bushman, and it was very cold. Kalahari can get really, really cold, in the winter, our summer. Well, this guy had to wear a loincloth. That was part of the job description, to take the tourists on a game walk, on a hunt. Yeah. Well, he did, and he was shivering, and my wife actually gave him her fleecy. She said, forget that, wear it and keep it. Anyway, so he took us on a simulated hunt. He had a bow and arrow, which was the kind that boys make as toys, and then he shot at a duiker skin that was stretched. I mean, yet that's an offer, and that is terrible. That kind of tourism. The other is good. It shows the people who, as they really are, shows them what they want, aspire to. What they do. In the evening they perform a trance dance. Mind you, not the real thing. That gets me to the other thing I want to talk about. They do a trance dance, but only the movement, the motions of it. They don't actually go in real trance. They simulate trance, and that is what I want to talk about. Here's a paper I did on that as well, on how there's a new way of trance dancing, which is not the real curing rite with trance and transformation, but it's done either for tourists, and they do it at night, which is all part of the expectation of the tourists, because they have read that it's a nocturnal dance. You need a fire and spirits behind you and all that. That's all offered. But there are also trance dances held by Bushmen when politicians visit, or when dignitaries come, because that's part of when politicians entertain dignitaries from overseas to display the people of Botswana, and that kind of trance dancing is done during the day, no trance. Often it's done not even by Bushmen, because Tswana people have taken over the dance and simulated, including loincloths and so on. So the trance dance has undergone regrettable changes, into something that is either a simulated, mimicked cultural performance for tourists or for politicians, or it is the other kind that I referred to earlier some hours ago, about the real professionalized trance dancers who do the real thing, trance and everything, but for a fee, for money, and in the process amass immense wealth. I mean, one of these trance dancers that I met, he has a large herd of cattle, a bank account, one owned a truck, yeah, which is very unusual for Bushmen to own in that part at that time. And so that's the other route the trance dance has gone, into a professionalized, commoditized performance by a ritual specialist for whom this is a source of income, of wealth, of status, of stature. And all this has to do with, is the most recent, like as I said, I've done fieldwork at Descartes over a span of 68, close to 50 years, 2 generations. And the erosion of sharing is one of the most noticeable things that, the sharing ethos replaced by what Richard has somewhere called the hoarding ethos. And sharing, which to me is the glue that holds together the egalitarian band society, that's going. And it's manifested in a very dramatic way in the process I just described, the professionalization, commoditization of the trance dance. The trance dance was one of the most, Megan Beasley wrote about that, one of the most stirring and displays of sharing. We always talk about sharing in terms of meat. Sure, Lorna Marshall wrote about that. Beautiful pieces of ethnography. But people also share the same way they forage for stories, they share stories, and they share nom. Nom is the healing potency, which is shared without pay, without remuneration, because that's what a trance dancer does, or a shaman. I use the term shaman, and I've been chided for that because the term, it's a big debate actually. Lewis Williams too uses shaman. Others say that it's a no-no. Shaman should not be used in this generic way. It has a specific meaning, i.e. Siberian, i.e. Chukchi, I guess, is it? And at the very least, there's not a shaman, but a shamanism, not shamanism, but shamanisms, and all that. Yeah, true. But still, I do like the term shaman because I see shamanism at work in this society, in their ritual, in their myth, in their hunting methods, in their cosmology. Yeah. Anyway, so the breakdown of sharing is manifested in these new ways of transcending, which of course raises the question, in my mind, I guess any anthropologist's mind, should we be concerned about that? I mean, traditions, customs, institutions always change, right? Maybe this is a new faith, the new way trans-dancing is now done. It's no longer to cure because people go to the clinic now to cure. Maybe the trans dance assumes a new function, a new objective, a new significance, and maybe this is it as a vehicle either to portray the identity of a people who are trying to stake out their identity in a society that is very much discriminating against the San, even expropriating them from the Central Kalahari Game Reserve, for example, at Kade. Should we applaud this kind of cultural transformation of a shared curing dance, curing ritual with transformation and altered states into a display of identity in the context of people who want to sustain and maintain and safeguard their identity, or as a means for income? Should we condemn that, or should we just say, well, yeah, that's the nature of culture? What authenticity and tradition and all that? All these questions come up, right? That we have dealt with in anthropology forever. Yes, yeah. Okay. The one other thing I want to talk about, further to change, is witchcraft. Witchcraft and sorcery. This is another new thing. I wrote an article back in 1992, actually, called "Not a Bushman Thing: Witchcraft among Bushmen and hunter-gatherers." Not a Bushman thing in quotation marks, because that's what the Bushmen told me. This is not a Bushman thing. This is something the black people do. We Bushmen don't have witchcraft. And I did the ethnohistorical and ethnographic record certainly bears that out, that witchcraft is really not something Bushmen people, San people, have in their culture as a means of expressing or dealing with conflict, with social tension, through malice, through controlled through either the manipulation of objects, witchcraft, or through transmission of some kind of psychic harm to somebody else, witchcraft. But the Bantu people have it, and have had it forever, it seems, for a long, long time. And the Bushmen have lived, the San in Khansi and elsewhere have lived in close proximity to San people. I'm thinking now also in areas of South Africa where Bushmen back in the 19th century lived in close proximity to Nguni people, and the work by some like Peter Jolly shows that they too have, even though it's not a Bushman thing, it's become a Bushman thing. So I was interested in their statement, witchcraft is not a Bushman thing, and the fact that I saw it everywhere amongst the San people. In fact, my monograph, one of the ones, has a whole section in one of my friends, a man named Zoe, who died of sorcery, and he was at my wife at Patricia's clinic. She couldn't help him, so they're afflicted by it. They are afflicted by it. They become targets of witchcraft, which can be so severe. This section is at the beginning of the book. Anyway, can be so severe that people get sick and might even die because it's a case of making yourself sick, of unsustained, constant anxiety, and then throw into this some kind of upper respiratory infection or pneumonia, and you die, but not really we would say in the West of witchcraft or sorcery, but of pneumonia, whereas they might say no, it's Molloy that did it, sorcery. Anyway, so what I did is I looked at a number, and in the village that I lived in, which I said earlier had a lot of conflict, ongoing conflict, and one of the manifestations of conflict was certainly Khaba, which is the Tswana for witchcraft, which the Tswana believe, very similar to the Azande, that it seems to be a pan-African, sub-Saharan, East African maybe more, that you have a substance in your stomach which is the witchcraft substance. So it's sort of mystical, physiological, which when you get angry causes harm to people around you, right? It's sort of spewed into the atmosphere and people get sick. Or Molloy, sorcery, where you manipulate objects, or you try to, often there's contagious magic involved. You take some substance from the person's body and do foul things with it and then put it under the person's bed or on his threshold. There were many cases like that in the village, at least in the 18 months that we were there, at least half a dozen that really worried people. So yet the Bushmen do not acknowledge that it's their thing. They say it's a black people. They are afflicted by it because they are afflicted by people. Black people who are. I mean, this is the thing about witchcraft. You never know really whether it's witchcraft fear and suspicion, or whether there's actually witchcraft consciously perpetrated, right? But the Bushmen think the black bewitched them and sorcerized them. But of late also, Bushmen are sorcerizing and bewitching one another. So what has happened is that some individuals have kind of assimilated the notion of Kaaba and the practice of manipulating foul substance to harm somebody else out of malice into their own culture. And that's what interested me, to see how have they grafted in this paper, how have they grafted witchcraft concepts and practices onto their own hitherto witchcraft-free, ritual culture. And the way they have done it basically is, I mean, the Bushmen have this notion that healing comes about when you heat up this healing substance potency in your stomach, through trance dancing. Well, what they have done is taken the Kaaba concept, which works similarly, except for malicious purposes rather than beneficial ones, and somehow grafted that onto Nom. So Nom, which hitherto was used for healing, can now be manipulated to the opposite effect. So that's what I did in that paper. It's another indication of another way in which cultural change is manifested in the society, which started out to be my research interest in my doctoral research. And one of them is the adoption of witchcraft and sorcery.